And Jesus said, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And what I find most interesting about Jesus' commission is what he left out. I do not hear Jesus say, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, except those people with white skin. I mean, consider this, Jesus had brown skin. Are those people with slanty eyes or yellow hair? Except those people who live on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, or across the border in Philistia or Phoenicia. Jesus puts no conditions on his commission. Go and make disciples of all people. Color, clan, class, culture are not considerations. Jesus is, however, explicit about what we, the people, all people, are to obey. Everything that he has commanded. And because everything is such a big word, we're really fortunate that just 3 chapters before the gospel text from Matthew this week, Jesus gives us a summary. It's in response to a question by this testy lawyer. And Jesus says, it's paraphrasing the Torah, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law, and the prophets. Now, many of us know these words, maybe not by heart, but we know these words. And we know how hard they are to follow, especially that second commandment. It is hard to follow because in spite of our best intentions, in spite of our deep desire to be broad-minded and open-hearted, we keep stumbling. We stumble over our unconscious biases or beliefs. Beliefs that people who do not look like us or talk like us, eat like us, pray like us, vote like us, somehow more likely to be dangerous or a threat to us. And though we do not want to, we then feel anxious around them. And before we know it, our unconscious beliefs and attitudes are translated into action. Think about it. A voice with an accent that's foreign to us responds to our phone call for tech support. And the thought that accompanies our rising impatience is, oh no. Be honest. It's evening. We're taking a walk, and we notice down the street a little ways are 2 men of dark skin leaning against a wall and talking to one another, and so we cross the street so as not to pass by them. A man of color asks a white woman to leash her dog, and instead she calls 911 and accuses him of violating her. A police officer crushes an unarmed black man because the officer believes this man is a threat to his life. When biases and beliefs are translated into behavior or action, racism happens. We all saw it this week. Before we walked into this service, Dave and Linda and I stood to pray. I couldn't speak. When I looked at them, he said, yeah, this week was hard. I had every single emotion. This is painful for every reason, inside and out. Earlier this week, I had a heart-rending conversation with one of our parishioners. Kind of makes this point. I will call him James. James and his wife are white. They have 2 biological daughters and a son whom they have adopted. He's biracial, clearly of black heritage. And between his semesters in college, I don't know if it was junior or sophomore year, William, we'll call him William was home. And he's asked if he could use his family's new Acura to drive downtown and meet his friends. Well, James shuddered at the prospect and immediately proceeded to warn William. If you are stopped by the police, be careful. Because James' mind was going and going and going. Oh my goodness. What might the police think if they see a dark-skinned boy driving this nice new car? So James, keep your hands on the steering wheel. Do not move quickly. And whatever you do not be a smart you-know-what. Be careful. Now here's the thing. James never felt that kind of fear when his daughter asked to drive the Acura downtown. He was not compelled to give her similar warnings. Think about that. Racism happens not because we're bad, but because throughout history, now here I'm going to pause a minute, history is nothing more than the telling and the retelling of our human story from a particular perspective. Always from a particular perspective. Generally from the perspective of whoever came out on top in that situation, whoever's telling the story. So historically, we have grouped people according to perceived differences. And it's not just us Americans or North Americans or South Americans or people across the pond. It's what we humans do. But these groupings support inhumane practices like colonialism and slavery and segregation and genocide and racial profiling and voter suppression. There are consequences to this. And each of these systemic expressions of racism is based on deep-seated and destructive biases or beliefs that certain groups of people are fundamentally different than others. And not just fundamentally different, but in some sense inferior. Or with a typecast of behavioral tendencies. You know, we've heard this. Those people are lazy. Those people are not very smart. Those people. It's no wonder it's so hard to obey everything Jesus has commanded. We are bound by biases and beliefs that are handed down from generation to generation. Blind attitudes that undergird the powers and the principalities of our culture. When we fear and recoil from people who appear different from us, we cannot possibly follow Jesus' commandment to love our neighbors. Now, I want to submit to you that this is really hard to admit. This is hard to hear, hard to admit. We don't like this. It's hard to admit that we have biases and beliefs about people. But you see, this not only applies to issues of race and ethnicity. Let me suggest that Republicans, Democrats, Greens, rainbows, harbor disparaging beliefs about one another's groups while maintaining a sense of moral or intellectual superiority. Admit it, we do this. We must be honest with ourselves. And we are imprisoned. We are imprisoned by our biases and beliefs. beliefs. And when they are translated into action, it is racism, it is sexism, it is ageism, it is prejudice. And we see this all across our country and the world. As all hell breaks loose. And we're angry, and we're afraid, and we're sad, and we're confused, and we're exhausted. So what are we to do? What are we to do if blaming is not an option? I have to confess that I spent all week wrestling with this, consulting with one of my mentors. And this is what I hear. Stop. Stop thinking you can fix it. God is already at work in the world. So be still and allow the power of the Holy Spirit to continue God's community-building, world-changing love, allowing that to work through you, through us. You see, this is what it means to baptize all nations. It means we affirm all people belong. Period. Everyone is an equal member. So stop. Listen. Listen to people's experience of race, gender, age, sexual orientation, disability, and class discrimination. Listen to their stories and feel empathy. Now here's a bizarre irony. During this time of social distancing, we can't touch one another, we can't even be near one another. We must allow ourselves to be touched. To be touched by our neighbor's needs and to reach out and touch their needs. If you've not already experienced the memorial service for George Floyd, it was held on Thursday. Although it is long, I suggest that this is a good place to start. Good place to start listening and to be touched. We must participate in these discussions of these difficult topics. Open our hearts and our minds without being defensive. You know, we've come by this through generations and generations and a culture undergirded by biases and beliefs about people. So, by stopping and listening, we can open ourselves to be transformed by the grace of God's presence with us. Today I stand here in utter unknowing. I have no idea how to lead us through this violent wilderness. I don't have a clue. What I cling to is Jesus' final promise to the disciples and us. His last words in the Gospel according to Matthew, I am with you always, to the end of the age. Dear people of God, this is the good news. We need not rely upon ourselves to navigate this wilderness, to figure this out. We find our confidence in the grace of God with us. And that alone gives us the presence and the authority to accept Jesus' commission and to go about the business of baptizing all nations, all people, including everyone, in the love of God. Baptism is all about inclusion. It is opening the way of inclusion. It is dignifying and promising and acting to fulfill the goodness of life for all people. Stop. Listen. Be touched and transformed by the grace of God with you. Amen.